to yet another episode of the Wilderness Insight, which is a project done by the Wilderness and Wildlife Protection Society of Royal College, where we interview professionals from the wildlife conservation field. My name is Charit Angama, and I have my colleague Malik Patiratna here with us, and we will be hosting today's discussion. So for today's discussion, we have Dr. Priyan Perera here with us.
Good morning.
Yes, sir. So before we move on to our first topic of discussion, could you please give us a brief introduction about yourself and your field of study?
First, I thank you for inviting me for this online session hosted by, I think, the Royal College Wilderness and Wildlife Protection Society. To give you a brief background about myself, I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Sri Jawadanapura, Department of Forestry and Environmental Science. So I teach subjects like wildlife management and sustainable tourism or ecotourism. So I did my undergrad at University of Sri Jawadanapura, and then I went to USA to do my higher studies and master's in environmental science and PhD in forestry. And then I joined the University of Sri Jawadanapura in 2011 as an academic and still serving there. So my main research areas are like, there are two main research areas, wildlife management and ecology, and sustainable tourism. So I do research, kind of interdisciplinary research in these areas.
Yes, sir. So, sir, moving on to the first of our discussion, sir. So, as we all know, tourism is a huge part of our country's economy. And nowadays, we see a lot of new hotels being built by the biggest hotel chains in the world. And along with city hotels, there are many hotels inside of wildlife sanctuaries, for example, Yala and Singaraj. These locations with their natural beauty are surely attractive for the tourists, which make it ideal for reach. Mainstream hotels, but it is also important that the environment around remains intact and is very well taken care of. So, ecotourism is one of your specialties, if I'm not mistaken. So, sir, how do you promote ecotourism within these hotels?
Actually, before talking about ecotourism and sustainable tourism, technically those are like two different things, because in sustainable tourism, or in the concept of sustainability, as you may already know, we are talking about three main components, right? One is the environment, the society, and the economy or the business aspect. So those are the three pillars of sustainability, as we say, right? So any sustainable operation should address the environment, the society, and the economic aspect. Now, when it comes to ecotourism, it is of course a form of sustainable tourism. But here it's kind of go beyond sustainability, because in ecotourism, it's always based on the natural environment, right? So it's about people going into the nature and having a experience, nature-based experience. And at the same time, you are just not going there to enjoy yourself, but to gain a learning experience about the nature. So in the concept of ecotourism, it's about a sustainable tourism practice, which includes education as well as nature. But the sustainable tourism, on the other hand, could be anything, as long as you address those three concerns, like the environment, the social responsibility, and the it has to be viable as a business, right? So you ask on how to promote the sustainable tourism, right? The ecotourism. Right. So actually, talking about ecotourism, promoting ecotourism in a country like Sri Lanka, of course, now as students of Wildlife and Nature Protection Society, I'm sure you guys must have visited so many places, not recently maybe due to the COVID, but I'm sure you must have been to a variety of natural environments. So the nature is always a key component in Sri Lanka's tourism, right? We know we have a lot of natural parks, forest reserves like the Singharaja, the Knuckles, right? Where you can do hiking, and then so many world famous national parks like Yala, Vilpattu, and then Cotton Plains. So all these, being a tropical country, we are rich with natural resources and biodiversity. So these natural resources actually provide a good basis or foundation for ecotourism, right? Now, talking about promoting ecotourism, of course, the global demand for these kind of sustainable and green tourism, as we say, right? Especially in Europe and North America, the demand for these kind of nature-based experiences are increasing. So as a result, many businesses have emerged in Sri Lanka, and they brand themselves as ecologists or ecotourism operations. But what we have to see here is whether they actually provide, or whether they are actually adhering to the principles of ecotourism. That is, whether they are giving a nature-based learning experience, not just taking people out to the nature and having fun, right? So it goes beyond, and it involves a strong learning component. So I would say we do have some ecotourism genuine. We can say there are few ecotourism operations which are like going hand in hand with the principles of ecotourism, but in most cases the term is just used in a kind of I would say misleading way, maybe, right, to promote certain businesses. But yes, but still, I think even these people who are like promoting their businesses as eco businesses or ecotourism businesses, they still try to at least meet a few requirements of ecotourism. So of course, I guess we are on the right track with proper awareness and maybe future training. We'll be able to develop this ecotourism sector in the country in a more sustainable manner.
So sorry, sir. So do you all like appreciate the hotels that are like onto ecotourism?
Yes, of course. There are some businesses that are already in ecotourism business. Now, for example, now you must have been to places like Thandalam Hotel, right? So that is, that is a good example for, I would say, sustainable tourism, right? Not maybe ecotourism, because now in ecotourism, we talk about our main focus is on catering for smaller visitor groups, right? So it's not like we are having these 5-star 300-room hotels, right? So in most cases, because the underlying idea here is to reduce the environmental footprint, right? So that's why in ecotourism we are focusing on the smaller visitor groups. But yeah, so as I mentioned, there are several operations, even examples in Sri Lanka that could be regarded as ecotourism operations. And to recognize them, there are various third-party certification systems, like you might be familiar with this ISO 14000 certificate, right? ISO certifications. So these are like third-party certifications that assess your operation and give you a kind of a credible guarantee that you are following a certain set of guidelines, right? So likewise, there are certain certification schemes to certify authentic ecotourism operations, like Rainforest Alliance, Green Globe. So there are actually certain tourism operations that have acquired these kind of certifications.
So just to clarify this before moving on, so you mentioned that there's a difference between sustainable tourism and ecotourism.
Yes.
So does ecotourism fall under sustainable tourism, or?
Very good question. Yes. So if you are actually ecotourism falls under sustainable tourism. So in principle, the concept of ecotourism includes three core criteria or principles. One being it has to be sustainable. Second, the learning component, as I mentioned, and the other one is it has to be nature-based, right? So by default, all these ecotourism operations comes under sustainable tourism. Yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. And as you mentioned, there are many startups and mainstream hotels as well that are very much into this whole ecotourism space. And nowadays we see a lot of countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Bali, and even islands of Italy and all. They promote a lot of ecotourism. So how well do you think Sri Lanka is doing in this ecotourism segment as of now? And do you suggest anything that we can do in order to take a few steps ahead? And can you name a few things that we can do to get better at this segment?
Yes. So you mentioned about what these other countries have taken. I mean, but still, so that's why I said at the beginning we are kind of misusing this term ecotourism. So people are like selling the nature, like giving nature-based experiences, purely not going to be ecotourism, right? Now, for example, even in Sri Lanka, if you go to Kitulgala, there are whitewater rafting, right? So people might call it ecotourism, but that is also nature-based, right? Maybe it's could be a sustainable practice as well. But in whitewater rafting, we don't talk about educating people, right? It's just purely an adventurous experience. But so likewise, maybe there are some hiking in mountains, right? So maybe it's just an adventurous experience. It may not include deep learning about the environment, right? So some of the examples you mentioned from Indonesia, Malaysia, like all these Thailand, Vietnam, countries like that. Again, what we have to see is whether these are like nature-based tourism or real ecotourism, right? So again, these two are two different aspects, right? Even in Sri Lanka, we greatly promote these wildlife tourism experience, right, based on our main national parks. But if you have been to Yala, you know the real situation, right? At times you have to wait like hours in the queue to get the tickets, especially in the peak season, right? And the number of vehicles entering the park, sometimes it goes up to 700, right? So what we have to see is whether the park and its natural environment can sustain this amount of visitation level in the long run, right? And what sort of impact it will cause on the biodiversity in the park, natural environments, and the animals. We know that there are a lot of these high visitation rates in Yala, and whenever you encounter a leopard, how many jeeps gather around it, right, and cause a lot of disturbance to the animal. So these are like, you can't say these are real ecotourism operations, right? They are just wildlife tourism operations, but we are doing those without any proper idea of the carrying capacity of the national parks, right? So these things have to be corrected and properly managed if we are to really, position ourselves as a ecotourism destination, right? So ecotourism, the concept of ecotourism is not just applicable to destinations like national parks. It is equally applicable for accommodation, the businesses that provide accommodation, right? Like we call them eco-lodges, right? Now, even at present, there are so many accommodation options that use this label called eco-lodge, right? But you have, in reality, if you check whether they are, following the real core principles of ecotourism, you will see that they fall short, right? So there are, of course, a few areas that we have to iron out if we are to really brand ourselves and some of our this ecotourism sector as a genuine environmental experience and sell it to the ecotourism market segment in the world. And of course, the market segment, the ecotourism market segment globally has increased, exponentially since 2000, year 2000. Still, it's increasing, and in the future, it is expected to increase even more. And if you look at the global, the demographics of this ecotourism segment, you always find they are high income and highly educated people, right? So that's why they are seeking educational and real authentic experience. So it is very important that we now in a mass tourism, you know how our tour guides just say some false information to the visitor, right? So all they care about is just get the job done and get some money. But in ecotourism, with educated people, you can't just fool around like that, right? So because so that's why this component we call it nature interpretation. That is a key component in ecotourism. Nature interpretation means how you give this learning experience to the visitors. So that's a whole different subject actually. But there is, so these are the aspects we have to improve if we are to promote this sector.
So now you mentioned nature interpretation, and so now there are many hoteliers, and like you mentioned now Yala Safari, many of the safari experiences are outsourced and by third-party individuals. So, and like you said, they don't really have the knowledge on ecotourism or any kind of tourism for that matter. So how do you share this information and make them aware of these things and the impact that it has?
Yes, yeah. Actually, as you correctly mentioned, now if you take a place like Yala, right? There are if my memory serves me right, there are like over 1,000 safari jeep owners registered with Yala National Park, right? So this Yala National Park is managed by the Department of Wildlife Conservation. So each jeep that enters the park should technically have a wildlife guide accompanying the visitors. But they are short of the staff. They can't afford to, especially in peak visitation periods, they can't actually have, it's not practical to have all their officers in assigning single officer to each vehicle, right? Because the number of jeeps entering the park is so high. At times it reaches up to 700 per day, right? So there is a very high number. So these, as you said, so the guide or the driver itself become the guide most of the time, right? So they, of course, there are some good interpreters, right? So you don't have to teach them. If they naturally have the skills, we come across those kind of people. But the majority, they don't have the required competency to give a real authentic nature-based experience. So we have as a I'm running a center at our university called Center for Sustainability. Through that, we have actually have done a lot of work to develop this nature interpretation sector. So we have done trainings for the Department of Wildlife Rangers, and then we are even currently conducting a certificate training course in nature interpretation, and at various, even at local level, we have conducted many short training programs targeting these those people who are involved in tourism business on how to give a proper nature-based experience to their visitors, and what are the guidelines they have to follow and things like that. So I think now again, even with most of these well-known hotels, right? They also have this profession called naturalist. In each of these leading big branded hotels, they have naturalists, right? So their duties actually now this role of a naturalist, it cannot be done by a ordinary person. You need a proper education. So in most cases, you will find graduates from universities entering into these kind of positions, right? So, so we have done a lot of training and collaborative work so far in our capacity to develop and increasing the competency of these nature guides. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So as you mentioned that education of these things is a really huge part of the whole ecotourism concept. And earlier you mentioned that the word ecotourism and sustainable tourism is often misused. So as you said, ecotourism should not only consist of an adventurous experience, it should also have a deep, it should also have an educational aspect, and it should affect the environment in a positive way.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think that is the most common misconception that a lot of people have, not only in Sri Lanka, but around the world.
Yeah.
And so we are slightly drifting away from the topic, but so do you think that now, since ecotourism is one of the most financially growing sectors of tourism around the world, do you think now, us Sri Lanka being a tropical country, do you see that as an opportunity for us if we base that whole ecotourism concept properly, if we use that concept properly, do you think it's an opportunity for us to grow our economy and grow our tourism as well?
Yeah, of course, definitely. Actually, as I mentioned, our country is rich with natural resources and ecosystem diversity. And you know that within 3 hours, if you go from Colombo to Kandy or maybe Norelia, how many different climatic zones you can get into, and how many different ecosystems or vegetation types you can come across, right? So not many countries offer that opportunity. And even to go to Jaffna, that's a entirely different area, right? Both culturally and even from natural resource wise, it's entirely different area. So we have all the resources and the setup to promote the ecotourism. So the only thing requires proper planning, as I said. So even the Sri Lankan Tourism Development Board nowadays they are prioritizing this green tourism concept. So it's not necessarily ecotourism, but sustainable tourism, because ecotourism, as I mentioned, is a market, separate market niche in sustainable tourism. Right? So it's a highly specialized market where you are catering to people with the different motives. Right? For example, broadly speaking, in the ecotourism market segment, we talk about hardcore ecotourists and softcore ecotourists. Right? Hardcore ecotourists, they don't really care about the facilities they are getting at the location. So all they care about is having a superior nature-based learning experience. Softcore ecotourists, on the other hand, they are not that much willing to go through pains, mosquito bites and stuff like that. They like some degree of facilities, but again, so this ecotourism market segment is dominated by actually softcore ecotourists. Right? So that's why you find that many people are developing these nature-based ecologists in a semi-luxury fashion. Right? Because at the same time, you are trying to, because the majority of the market segment is softcore ecotourists who demand nature as well as facilities. Right? So that's why you find these small type of ecologists developed in that fashion. But at the same time, you find places like mud huts or tree houses or basic facilities like that, right? But still, some people are willing to pay like $200 to sleep in a tree house. So that's the type of a market we are talking about here, right? So it's all about giving them a superior nature-based experience that they cannot have in their countries, maybe, right? So this is actually a very, very lucrative kind of market segment that will have a great potential, not only because of the financial gains, but at the same time, it's going to be beneficial for the hosting community, the environment, as well as the society.
Okay, sir. So, sir, it's our knowledge that you are currently working on a project focused on the ecotourism in the coastal areas of the island.
Yes, actually, that's kind of a research project we are doing now. That is kind of an interdisciplinary study. You must have, you know the word ecology, right? The ecology, you learn it as a subject, maybe in your A-levels and stuff like that, right? But now in tourism field, there's another subject called recreation ecology, right? So this recreation ecology is kind of a new discipline which looks into the impacts of our recreational activities on the environment. For example, we just talk about how the over-visitation at Yala National Park cause various environmental impacts to the wildlife, right? You must have seen media reports that some leopards even have been killed because of the safari jeeps riding at the higher speeds, right? So those kind of impacts are there. And of course, if you carefully observe the roads or the nature trails in national parks, you will often find whenever they get the hint that there's a leopard or bear somewhere, they just go off-road, right? Not in the assigned roads. Maybe they go out of the road and try to get to the attraction. So those kind of irresponsible activities actually cause damages to the natural environments in the long run, right? Soil compaction, soil erosion, and then they damage the vegetation, and of course they damage the and disturb the wildlife, etc. So studying the impacts of our recreational activities on the environment is the whole idea of this subject called recreation ecology. So coming back to the project we are doing, we are doing currently, doing a research on how our recreational activities affect the coastal birds, right? Because most of these migratory birds, they occupy these coastal habitats, right? So in our recreational activities can cause damage, disturbances to these coastal birds, right? So in this study, what we mainly focused on is what sort of disturbances our human recreational activities cause on these coastal birds, especially the migrating birds. For example, now let's say if we are riding, exploring the nature or natural beauty inside in a coastal wetland like Boondala, right? Boondala National Park, that's a coastal wetland actually. So how these approaching vehicles affect or disturb the birds, right? For example, if the birds were feasting or having foraging birds, let's say, right? So how these foraging activities are disturbed by approaching vehicles. So those kind of, and at what distance the birds get disturbed. So having this knowledge on these kind of parameters is essential in responsible tourism planning, because once you know at what distance the birds respond to you, right? I think even you must have this, be having this experience, right? So let's say there's a bird in your home garden, and if you try to get close to that bird, first the bird will just lift its head and show some kind of alert behavior, right? And if you try to get further close, they will fly away, right? So the distance that a bird shows some kind of a response, alert response, is called alert distance, right? And then if you try to get more closer, they will fly away. So that's called the flushing distance, right? So these kind of, in recreation ecology, especially with respect to birds, we collect or experimentally try to estimate these kind of distances, right? So once you determine those parameters, we can use them in planning of nature trails inside the park, especially, for example, now if you want to construct a nature trail, new nature trail, and there are some popular breeding sites of birds, then you know what sort of distance you have to keep, right? We call it buffering distance. So, so in this particular project you talked about, we mainly focused on those kind of aspects to generate the necessary knowledge to for park managements to make better decisions.
So now on paper, there are many steps that you can take in order to overcome these things, but when you actually want to implement it and put these things into work, there are many burdens that you come across. So are there any problems that you have faced so far during these research? And if so, how have you overcome those things by, can you name a few? If you don't.
You mean the problems we faced during the research project, or
Yes, sir.
implementing?
So now you mentioned that you are currently working on a project regarding coastal areas.
Yes.
So what are the problems that you face when trying to implement these things, and how do you tend to overcome it?
I mean, when you do this kind of research work, of course, there are quite a few practical issues you have to face. You should be able to, prepare to spend long hours in the field, because this take some intensive field work, right? So, generally, in doing research in country like Sri Lanka, of course, there are a lot of problems, financial problems, the logistics and everything. But still, what as researchers, what we care about at the end of the day is whether someone is making use of our finding, right? So that is where the gap actually is. We produce this knowledge and we try to convey that knowledge to the relevant authorities, but in reality, only like 10 to 15% are utilized. So that's the main, kind of the disappointment we have as researchers. But of course, you can't implement all these research-based findings or stuff, because there are a lot of practical aspects you have to look at the same time. So, but again, now even in a new protected area tourism planning, you don't find much of thought going into planning when it comes to setting up wildlife tourism aspects, or developing wildlife tourism in newly created national park. So of course, there's if relevant expertise are involved, or if they are prepared to get the involvement of relevant experts, I think we could do a much better job. So definitely, I would say, rather than field works or whatever the difficulties, I would say our main concerns as researchers is, at the end of the day, we can derive more satisfaction if somebody is using our knowledge. So that's I think where we have to bridge the gap.
Yes, sir. So taking all of the questions that we asked and your replies, it is pretty clear that knowledge is a real issue when it comes to ecotourism in Sri Lanka, and that knowledge on these matters is really important to grow this kind of segment. So kind of moving on from the subject of ecotourism, so you also specialize in wildlife conservation and environmental management. So, but due to the ongoing pandemic, all of us are asked to follow strict guidelines and follow safety measures. So, has that affected your research and going forward with things? So, how has that experience been?
Yeah, of course, this pandemic has changed or interrupted all our normal activities in life. So the research areas are not exemptions, right? Especially my area of research, which are not laboratory based. You have to go outdoors. So it's serious drawback, because you can't take people out to the field and put them in risk under this situation. So things are kind of on hold largely, but you can't do much about that because the entire world is facing this crisis. But as you said, I'm also working on this in terms, I mean, when talking about wildlife management, I'm working on a project, kind of a flagship project on pangolins, right? In Sinhalese, we call them kaballava or air, right? So that is, there are like 8 species in the world. So we have the species called Indian pangolin, and in Sri Lanka, no research have been done prior to 2014 on this species. So I was the first to initiate research on this species, and up to now we have developed, generated a lot of knowledge on this scientific knowledge about the behavior and the ecology distribution of this species, and of course the illegal trading, because their scales are used as medicines in China. So a lot of illegal trafficking takes place, and now there are 2 species, Asian pangolin species, Chinese pangolin, and the species you find in Malaysia, etc. They have been almost, gone, their populations have drastically declined. So now our Indian pangolin is becoming a major component in the supply market, right? So even in recent times, we came across so many reports that the law enforcement authorities seizing this kind of scales, right? So we are, so the population of Indian pangolins is facing that threat at the present, and we can expect that with more of these international development projects going on with foreign workers coming from China. So in fact, we have observed that some demand for the pangolin meat and scales have come from these foreign workers. So definitely the threats are going to be much high in the future. So that's another key area we are working on. But nowadays we are doing the genetic studies of this species, and also some other lab-based work. So that's how we use our time, because since you can't go out there and do field-based research, so we are using this pandemic time as productively as possible to do some laboratory-based works. So in the genetic studies, our target is to, our goal is to see whether the species we found in Sri Lanka is genetically different from the Indian pangolins in India and Pakistan. Maybe our findings will result in a subspecies, like in leopard, right? Because in the Sri Lankan leopard is a subspecies, Panthera pardus scotia. Likewise, maybe we will have a subspecies of pangolin. You never know.
Yes, sir. So the pandemic was not a good thing to anyone, and it doesn't matter what you do, it has limited every single thing, and it has set the whole world on halt. So unfortunately, we are running a little late on time. But sir, out of pure curiosity, does wildlife conservation and environmental management have anything to do with ecotourism and sustainable tourism?
Of course, it is largely connected, because now I just explained the subject of recreation ecology, right? So that's about identifying our impact of human recreational activities on wildlife or plants or components of the environment, right? So there you can clearly see the link between tourism and wildlife, right? And when it comes to wildlife tourism, of course, the major attraction being wildlife, and you have on the other side, other hand, you have this human component who are willing to go out there and observe. And then comes the how you manage the whole scenario. So that is about environmental management, right? So once you know the impacts, the mitigation of impacts and managing the impacts comes under environmental science. So all these are like interconnected, deeply interconnected. Yes, so the answer to your question is they have very strong linkages. And to find an answer or solution for, especially for natural resource management problems, you need to look at, you need to have an interdisciplinary approach, right? Purely having a biological knowledge won't help, right? Because doesn't matter how much knowledge you have on the population or biology of the species, but when it comes to implementing conservation plans at the ground level, you will find that there are many other interested groups, right? You can't implement certain laws, because if you implement certain laws, some groups of people will be in disadvantage, right? Some might lose their economic opportunities or jobs, right? So it's about, so the environmental science, it's all about managing all these components, like the society, the natural components, and of course, the other. It's about having a holistic approach to a problem.
Yes, sir. Like you said, so environmental management, wildlife conservation, and ecotourism, everything goes hand in hand. And like you said, knowledge on these matters is really important for hoteliers, for third-party service providers, for everyone. Knowledge is key. So unfortunately, we have come to the end of today's discussion, and me being one who has, an immense amount of passion towards green tourism, I really enjoyed today's discussion, and I learned a lot. So, Dr. Priyan Perera, thank you for sharing all the information with us, sir. And we hope you great health during these tough times, and we hope you success with all your research. And thank you for joining, sir. And thank you everyone for joining today's episode. Have a good day.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, and I wish you all the very best with your future work in this wildlife protection society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.